At the company Christmas party, my coworker announced, "I'm getting the promotion we both applied for. My uncle owns the company." Everyone congratulated him. Then the CEO walked in, my father-in-law. He'd been testing my coworker's integrity. The lukewarm Prosecco in my glass was going flat, much like the mood of the 300 employees gathered in the ballroom of the Marriott Marquis had been until exactly 8:14 p.m. on Friday, December 15th. It was the annual holiday gala for Sterling Logistics, a supply chain management firm with a valuation of $450 million, and the air was thick with the scent of pine, expensive perfume, and desperate ambition. I stood near the chocolate fountain, a strategic vantage point that allowed me to observe the room without being drawn into the sycophantic orbit of the man currently holding court at the center of the dance floor. His name was Jason Cobb, a 32-year-old regional manager with a dazzling smile, a tailored navy suit that I happened to know was a knockoff he bought online for $299, and a moral compass that pointed exclusively toward his own ego. He was holding a microphone that he had commandeered from the DJ, his face flushed with the kind of confidence that only ignorance can provide. "I just want to say," Jason announced, his voice booming through the high-quality speakers, "that it's been a tough year for everyone, but cream rises to the top, and I have it on good authority, familial authority, actually, that the senior vice president position is staying in the family." He paused for dramatic effect, winking at the crowd. "My uncle, the great Arthur Sterling, believes in keeping the legacy alive, so drinks are on the future VP!" The room erupted in applause. It was a mix of genuine congratulations from the sycophants and polite, terrified, clapping from the support staff who knew that Jason was a tyrant who had once fired an assistant for bringing him the wrong brand of sparkling water. I didn't clap. I didn't frown. I simply took a sip of my flat Prosecco and checked my watch. It was 8:16 p.m. The timing was impeccable. Jason was basking in the glow of his own fabrication, unaware that the uncle he was referencing, my father-in-law, Arthur Sterling, was currently standing in the service corridor with a forensic accountant and a security team, waiting for my signal. But to understand why I was standing there with the pulse rate of a sleeping gathered while my nemesis claimed my promotion, you have to understand the 6 months of psychological warfare and corporate espionage that preceded this moment. It wasn't just about a job title. It was about the $45,000 in diverted funds, the 3 falsified quarterly reports, and the systematic gaslighting of my team. It began in June, when the SVP position opened up. I had been with Sterling Logistics for 7 years. I started in the warehouse, loading trucks at 4 a.m. to pay for my MBA. I worked my way up to director of operations through grit, efficiency models, and 16-hour days. I met my wife, Elena Sterling, 5 years ago at a charity gala, not a board meeting. When we got married, Arthur and I made a pact. I would keep my last name, Bennett, and no one at the company outside of HR would know about the familial connection. I wanted to earn my place. I didn't want the stain of nepotism on my resume. Arthur, a man of old-school integrity, who still drove a 10-year-old Volvo despite being worth 9 figures, respected that. Then came Jason. He was hired externally 6 months ago as a consultant to streamline our West Coast division. He was charming, handsome, and utterly incompetent. Within 2 weeks, he had streamlined the department by firing 2 senior analysts with 20 years of combined experience and replacing them with a software subscription that cost the company $12,000 a month and didn't 26 e-consolidate work. When I raised concerns during the Q3 budget meeting, citing the $42,000 operational loss, Jason smiled at me across the mahogany table and said, "You're thinking too small, Bennett. You have to spend money to make money." My uncle taught me that. That was the first time he dropped the uncle card. He didn't say Arthur's name explicitly, but he implied it heavily. He told stories about family barbecues at the estate and summering in the Hamptons with the old man. The office ate it up. People are terrified of power, and Jason wore his proximity to power like a suit of armor. I knew he was lying. I had been to every family barbecue for the last 4 years. I had spent every summer in the Hamptons at Arthur's cottage. Jason Cobb had never been there. He was, as I later found out through a background check that cost me $150 and took 3 days to process, the son of Arthur's second cousin's ex-wife. A connection so tenuous, it was practically non-existent. Arthur had met him once at a funeral in 1998 and hadn't spoken to him since. But Jason was banking on the fact that Arthur was a recluse who rarely visited the satellite offices and that no one would dare fact-check the boss's nephew. It was a bold con, and it was working. By September, Jason had effectively seized control of the narrative. He took credit for the logistics overhaul I had designed in 2021. He put his name on my slide decks. He scheduled meetings at 5 p.m. on Fridays when he knew I had to pick up my daughter from daycare, then claimed I wasn't committed to the company culture. The breaking point came in October. We were bidding on the Project Meridian contract, a logistics deal with a pharmaceutical giant worth $85 million over 5 years. I had spent 3 months building the proposal. I had modeled the shipping routes, negotiated the fuel surcharges, and secured the warehouse space in Reno. It was my magnum opus. 2 days before the presentation, I came into my office to find my laptop missing. Security footage, which I reviewed later, showed Jason entering my office at 7:42 p.m. and leaving with a flash drive. The next next morning, he presented his proposal to the board. It was my work, slide for slide, down to the specific font choice, Calibri, light, size 11. He even kept the typos I hadn't fixed yet. The board was impressed. They gave him a standing ovation. I sat in the back of the room, my hands shaking under the table. I went to Arthur that night. We sat in his study, surrounded by the smell of old leather and pipe tobacco. I laid it all out, the stolen work, the uncle lies, the morale drain. Arthur listened, his face unreadable. When I finished, he poured 2 glasses of scotch, a 1,982 Macallan that cost $4,500 a bottle, and slid one to me. I know, he said quietly. I've been watching him. HR flagged his expense reports last month. He's charging personal dinners at Nobu as client development. He spent $3,200 on a team-building retreat that was just him and his girlfriend at a spa in Ojai. I was stunned. Why haven't you fired him? I asked. Arthur took a sip of scotch. Because firing him is too easy, he said, his eyes hardening into the steel that had built an empire. If I fire him now, he goes to a competitor and spins a story about how he was pushed out by jealous middle management. He becomes a martyr. No, we need to expose him. We need to let him climb so high that when he falls, everyone sees the crater. And so, Operation Glasshouse was born. It was a procedural trap designed to test not just Jason's competence, but his criminal intent. We created a dummy vendor account in the system, Apex Solutions. We made it look like a logistics consulting firm that specialized in high-risk expedited shipping. I built a fake website, a fake LinkedIn page, and even set up a burner phone number. Then, Arthur sent a company-wide memo announcing a discretionary slush fund for the upcoming SVP of operations to manage off-book logistics challenges. It was bait. Highly illegal bait if used improperly, but perfectly tracked if he took it. We gave Jason access to the fund on November 1st. We waited. On November 3rd, at 10:14 a.m., Jason transferred $5,000 to Apex Solutions. On November 10th, he transferred another $8,500. By December 1st, he had funneled $28,400 into the fake vendor account. But here is the kicker. He wasn't using the money for shipping. He was transferring it from Apex Solutions to a personal PayPal account linked to an email address, jason.cobb.winner@gmail.com. We had him. We had the bank logs. We had the IP addresses. We had the wire transfer receipts. We had grand larceny and embezzlement documented in real time. But Arthur wanted the cherry on top. He wanted the public declaration. He wanted Jason to claim the throne right before the floor dropped out. The Christmas party. Arthur had decided last week, looking at the calendar. He thinks he's getting the promotion on the 15th. Let's let him announce it. So here we were. The applause was dying down. Jason was beaming, shaking hands, accepting the preemptive worship of the junior associates. Thank you, he said into the mic. I know some of you are surprised. I know some of you thought Bennett might get it. He pointed a finger at me across the room. The spotlight followed his finger, blinding me for a second. And hey, Bennett is a good worker, solid guy. But leadership requires vision. It requires DNA. The crowd chuckled nervously. It was a direct insult, a slap in the face delivered with a smile. I looked at him. I didn't blink. I raised my glass of water in a mock toast. He laughed. That's the spirit, Bennett. No hard feelings. You'll make a great assistant to the regional VP. The arrogance was breathtaking. It was a physical force in the room. He really believed it. He believed that his lies were reality, that his theft was innovation, and that his bloodline made him untouchable. He didn't know that the man he claimed was his uncle had spent the last 3 hours reviewing the evidentiary binder I had prepared. The binder was 3 inches thick. It contained the side-by-side comparison of my project files and his presentation. It contained the expense reports for the spa trip. It contained the chat logs where he told his administrative assistant to fudge the numbers on the Q3 report. And, most damning of all, it contained the full transaction history of the Apex Solutions account. The music started to swell again. A generic, upbeat pop song meant to signal the start of the dancing, but it was cut short by a screech of feedback. The double doors at the back of the ballroom, the heavy oak ones usually reserved for fire exits or VIP entrances, swung open with a heavy, authoritative thud. The room turned. Standing there, flanked by 2 large men in dark suits, private security, not the hotel staff, and a woman carrying a briefcase, was Arthur Sterling. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing a charcoal wool suit, a white shirt, and a tie that was loosened at the collar. He looked tired. He looked furious. And he looked like a man who was about to conduct an execution. The silence that swept across the room was instantaneous. It moved like a wave from the back to the front, extinguishing conversations and laughter until the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. Jason froze on stage. His smile faltered, then twitched back into place, a reflex of his narcissism. Uncle Arthur, he shouted into the microphone, his voice cracking slightly. What a surprise! I was just telling everyone the good news. Arthur didn't smile. He didn't wave. He walked down the center aisle, the crowd parting for him like the Red Sea. He walked with a rhythm that was slow, deliberate, and terrifying. Every step echoed on the parquet floor. He didn't look at the employees. He kept his eyes locked on Jason. When he reached the edge of the dance floor, he stopped. He looked up at the stage. Get off the stage, Mr. Cobb, Arthur said. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice was projected by the sheer force of his authority, even without a microphone. You are embarrassing yourself. Jason laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. Oh, come on, Artie, don't be like that. I was just rallying the troops. troops, celebrating the promotion. There is no promotion, Arthur said, his voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. And I am not your uncle. The gasp from the crowd was audible. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Jason's face went pale. What? Of course you are. We're family. The barbecue? The Hamptons? I have never seen you at my home, Arthur said, taking a step closer to the stage. And if you are referring to the connection through my second cousin's ex-wife, I believe that makes us strangers who share a very distant, very regretful genetic accident. But that is not why I am here. Arthur gestured to the woman with the briefcase, Miss Liang, the head of legal. She stepped forward and placed the briefcase on a cocktail table. She opened it. I am here, Arthur continued, because for the last 6 months, you have been stealing from this company. You have been stealing credit. You have been stealing time. And, as of November 3rd, you have been stealing actual currency. Jason stepped back, tripping slightly over a monitor cable. That's a lie. That's Bennett, he pointed at me again. Bennett is poisoning you against me. He's jealous. Arthur turned slowly to look at me. I was still standing by the chocolate fountain, my water glass in hand. He looked at me with a respect that he had never shown in the office before. He nodded once. It was the signal. I set my glass down. I walked toward the center of the room. I didn't rush. I walked with the steady, rhythmic pace of a man who knows the structural integrity of the bridge he is crossing. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out my own envelope. It wasn't thick. It was just one sheet of paper. I handed it to Arthur. The IP trace on the Apex Solutions transfer, I said, my voice clear in the silence. Confirmed 10 minutes ago by IT. The transfer originated from a laptop with the MAC address ending in 4F22. That is the device assigned to Jason Cobb. Arthur took the paper. He didn't even look at it. He just held it up. Mr. Cobb, Arthur said, this is a warrant for your arrest. The gentlemen behind me are not my security detail. They are detectives from the NYPD Financial Crimes Division. We filed the report this morning. The color drained from Jason's face so completely he looked like a wax figure. Arrest? He squeaked. For what? Grand larceny, wire fraud, embezzlement. Arthur listed the charges as if reading a grocery list. And, on a personal note, for insulting the intelligence of every person in this room. The two detectives moved forward. They ascended the stairs to the stage. The clinking of handcuffs was the loudest sound in the world. As they turned Jason around, reciting his rights, he looked out at the crowd. He looked for an ally. He looked for a friend. He found 300 people staring at him with a mixture of shock and disgust. Then he looked at me. You set me up, he hissed as they led him down the stairs. You trapped me. I looked him in the eye. I didn't trap you, Jason, I said, my voice low but audible to everyone in the front row. I just gave you the rope. You're the one who tied the knot. The detectives marched him out the same doors Arthur had entered. The room was silent for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. Then Arthur turned to the crowd. He picked up the microphone that Jason had dropped. I apologize for the interruption to your evening, Arthur said, his tone shifting from executioner back to CEO. It is never pleasant to remove a cancer, but it is necessary for the health of the body. Integrity is not a buzzword at Sterling Logistics. It is the currency of our trade. When you lie about who you are, you compromise what we do. He paused, looking around the room until his eyes landed on me. There is, however, one piece of truth in Mr. Cobb's speech. I am indeed announcing the new Senior Vice President of Operations tonight. The position requires vision, it requires hard work, and it requires the kind of loyalty that doesn't need to scream to be heard. He gestured for me to come up to the stage. I walked up the steps. Ladies and gentlemen, Arthur said, placing a hand on my shoulder, please welcome your new Senior VP, Robert Bennett, who, for the record, is my son-in-law. A fact he asked me to hide for 5 years, so he could prove he deserved this job on his own merits. I think we can all agree. He has proven it. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was thunderous. It was the sound of justice being served with a side of open bar. But the night wasn't over. As the music started back up and the shock began to wear off, the real work began. I spent the next 3 hours not celebrating, but answering questions. The team was rattled. They needed reassurance. They needed to know that the toxicity was gone. I didn't drink. I stayed sober. I stayed focused. At 11:30 p.m., as the party was winding down, I went out to the terrace for fresh air. Arthur was there, smoking a cigar. You did good, Robert, he said, looking out at the city skyline. He's in central booking. Arraignment is Monday. What about the Apex money? I asked. Recovered, Arthur said. We froze the account an hour ago, but the damage to the department, that will take time to fix. I have a plan for that, I said, pulling a folded document from my pocket. The restructuring plan. The real one, not the one Jason stole. Arthur smiled. I figured you might. Monday morning, I agreed. 8 a.m. I walked away, leaving him on the terrace. I got in the elevator and went down to the lobby. My wife, Elena, was waiting for me in the car. She knew everything, of course. She had been the one who helped me verify the bank routing numbers. When I got in the car, she handed me a thermos of hot coffee. Is it done? She asked. It's done, I said. He's gone. She squeezed my hand. Good. Now let's go home. You have a big job starting Monday. I looked out the window as we drove through the rainy streets of New York. I thought about Jason sitting in a cell. I thought about the lies. I thought about the sheer, unadulterated entitlement of a man who thought he could inherit respect instead of earning it. And then I thought about the spreadsheet I had waiting on my desk. The supply chain analysis for Q1. The optimization protocols. The work. It was going to be a mess to clean up. It was going to be hard. And I couldn't wait to get started. The fluorescent lights of the 42nd second floor hummed with a sterile, expectant frequency as I stepped off the elevator at exactly 7:45 a.m. on Monday, December 18th. The usual morning cacophony of phones ringing and coffee machines hissing was absent, replaced by a hushed, nervous silence that felt less like a corporate office and more like a cathedral after a funeral. Jason's office, a corner suite with panoramic views of the Hudson River that he had commandeered 3 months ago by bullying the facilities manager, was now a crime scene, literally. 2 strips of yellow police tape formed an X over the frosted glass door, and a uniformed officer from the NYPD's evidence collection unit was sitting outside, logging the entry of a forensic accountant named Sarah Jenkins. I walked past the gawking junior analysts, who quickly buried their heads in their monitors as I approached, and went straight to my desk. My inbox was already at capacity, 342 unread emails, mostly from vendors asking if their invoices were valid or if they were part of Jason's Ponzi scheme. Arthur was already in the boardroom with the crisis management team. We spent the next 12 hours not doing logistics, but doing damage control. The Project Meridian client, a pharmaceutical giant named MedTech, had called at 9 a.m., threatening to pull the $85 million contract due to instability in leadership. I took the call. "Mr. Henderson," I said, keeping my voice level despite the adrenaline spiking my heart rate to 110 beats per minute. "The instability has been excised. The cancer is out. What remains is the architect of the proposal you originally approved. I wrote the code for the shipping routes. I designed the cold chain storage protocols. Jason Cobb couldn't tell you the difference between a reefer truck and a flatbed. I can." There was a long silence on the other end, a silence that cost roughly $4,000 in billable hours. "You have 1 week," Henderson finally said. "Show me the real data. If I see one discrepancy, we walk." I hung up. I didn't sleep for the next 4 days. I slept on the leather couch in my office, subsisting on black coffee and protein bars, rebuilding the entire Q1 strategy from the ground up. But while I was fighting to save the company's future, the legal system was dismantling Jason's past. The arraignment on Tuesday was a grim affair. I attended as the primary witness for the prosecution. Jason was brought into the courtroom in a gray jumpsuit, stripped of his Italian suits and his arrogance. He looked smaller. The bluster was gone, replaced by a twitchy, feral anxiety. His lawyer, a court-appointed defender, because his assets had been frozen by the judge at 9 a.m. that morning, tried to argue that the Apex Solutions transfer was a misunderstanding, a testing of the system authorized by a verbal agreement. It was a desperate, flimsy lie. The assistant district attorney, a sharp woman named Mrs. Galloway, who had specialized in white-collar fraud for 15 years, simply held up the IP log. "Your Honor," she said, her voice dry as dust, "the defendant transferred funds to a PayPal account linked to his personal email. He then used those funds to pay off a gambling debt on a site called Vegas Virtuoso. Unless the company authorized a $28,000 donation to an online poker platform, this is grand larceny." The judge set bail at $500,000. Jason didn't have it. He was remanded to Rikers Island to await trial. The discovery process over the next 6 months was like peeling back the layers of a rotten onion. The forensic accountants found that the $28,400 from the Apex trap was just the tip of the iceberg. Jason had been running a shadow budget in the West Coast division. He had been double billing clients for fuel surcharges and pocketing the difference. He had sold our proprietary client list to a competitor for $15,000, a transaction we found trace of in a deleted signal chat on his work phone. The total damages amounted to $342,000 in direct theft and nearly $2 million in potential lost revenue. But the most personal betrayal was found in a folder on his hard drive labeled Leverage. Inside were photos of employees, screenshots of private emails he had hacked, and a dossier on Arthur's health history. He was planning to blackmail the board. He wasn't just a thief, he was a predator. We shared this evidence with the DA. The charges were upgraded to include corporate espionage and extortion. Jason's defense strategy shifted from misunderstanding to entrapment. His new lawyer, paid for by his mother who had remortgaged her house, filed a motion to dismiss, claiming that the Apex Solutions dummy vendor was an illegal sting operation. We had to testify in a pre-trial hearing in May. I sat on the stand for 4 hours. "Mr. Bennett," the defense attorney asked, pacing in front of the jury box, "did you create the Apex Solutions entity specifically to tempt my client?" "I created a stress test," I corrected him, leaning into the microphone. "In engineering, we test a bridge by putting weight on it. If the bridge collapses, we don't blame the weight. We blame the structural integrity. Your client didn't just fail the test, he actively looked for a way to exploit it. He wasn't tempted, he was revealed." The judge denied the motion to dismiss. The trial was scheduled for September, but Jason never made it to trial. Faced with the overwhelming weight of the digital forensic evidence, the terabytes of logs, the bank transfers, the Leverage folder he broke, on August 14th at 2 p.m., his lawyer called Mrs. Galloway. He wanted a deal. We agreed to hear it. The terms were finalized 3 days later. Jason Cobb pled guilty to 1 count of grand larceny in the second degree and 1 count of scheme to defraud. He was sentenced to 3 to 9 years in state prison with a mandatory restitution order of $342,000. I was there for the sentencing. I wanted to see the end of the equation. When the judge handed down the sentence, Jason Jason turned to look at the gallery. He looked at Arthur, who sat stone-faced in the front row. Then he looked at me. There was no anger in his eyes anymore, just a hollow, crushing realization of his own irrelevance. He was led away in handcuffs, the metallic click echoing the finality of a closing ledger. The aftermath at Sterling Logistics was a slow, painful reconstruction. We didn't just have to replace the money, we had to replace the trust. I fired the 3 junior managers Jason had brought in sycophants who had enabled his theft, and rehired the 2 senior analysts he had let go. I called them personally. I apologized. I offered them a 20% raise and a signing bonus. They came back. We rebuilt the Project Meridian team. We delivered the Q1 results to MedTech in March, showing a 15% increase in efficiency under my new routing protocols. Mr. Henderson flew in from Chicago to sign the renewal personally. I was wrong about the instability, he told me, shaking my hand in the boardroom where Jason had once stolen my presentation. You run a tight ship, Bennett. I run a clean ship, I replied. There's a difference. Arthur retired 2 years later. It wasn't a sudden decision. It was the natural conclusion of a transition plan we had accelerated after the Jason incident. He announced it at the annual gala, in the same ballroom, exactly 3 years after the arrest. The mood was different this time. The Prosecco was cold. The air smelled of success, not desperation. Arthur stood on the stage, looking out at the 500 employees we had grown since the cleanup. 3 years ago, Arthur said, his voice softer now, less commanding but more revered. We faced a crisis of character. We learned that a name doesn't make a leader. Blood doesn't make a family. Action makes a leader. Loyalty makes a family. He called me up to the stage. I am stepping down as CEO, effective immediately, he announced. And I am handing the reins to the man who saved this company not with a speech, but with a spreadsheet. Robert Bennett. The applause was genuine. I felt it in the floorboards. I looked out at the sea of faces. Faces I knew. Names I knew. People whose jobs I had protected. I took the microphone. I didn't make a joke. I didn't promise free drinks. Thank you, I said simply. Get some rest tonight. We have the Q4 projections to review on Monday, and I expect everyone to be on time. They laughed because they knew I meant it, and they knew that on time meant employed and safe. 5 years have passed since that night. I am 42 years old. Sterling Logistics is now valued at $650 million. We expanded into the European market last year. I work hard. I still arrive at 7 a.m. I still check the invoices personally once a month, a habit I can't shake. Jason was released on parole 6 months ago. I know this because the system notifies the victims. He is living in a halfway house in Queens. He works at a car wash. He is barred from working in any financial or fiduciary capacity for the rest of his life. I don't wish him ill. I don't think about him much at all, actually. He is a variable that was solved and removed from the function. Sometimes, though, late at night, when the office is quiet and the city lights are blinking outside my window, I open the safe in my office. Inside, next to the company charter and the original stock certificates, is a single sheet of paper. It's the printout of the Apex Solutions transfer log. It hangs there not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that integrity is not a default state. It is a constant, active choice. It is a structure that must be maintained, inspected, and reinforced. I close the safe. I spin the dial. I put on my coat and walk out to the elevator. The building is solid. The foundation is deep. And as I walk out into the cool night air of Manhattan, I know exactly who I am. I am not anyone's nephew. I am not anyone's lucky break. I am the architect of my own life, and the blueprints are unassailable. I get into the car where Elena is waiting. She smiles at me. Ready to go home? She asks. Always, I say, and we drive away, leaving the glass tower behind us, shining in the dark like a beacon of order in a chaotic world.